This off. All right, welcome everyone. My name is Dennis. I'm the organizer of this meetup. If you found us any way outside of our meetup group, look for us on meetup.com. We're the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. We used to meet once a month in person in the Bay Area, and of course we moved to Zoom. And we're much more frequent. We have 1 or 2 meetups per month, per week, usually on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So if you check our meetup page, there's a whole bunch more in May and even into June. Without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to our presenter, Lee Price. Lee is a thought leadership consultant at Lee Price Ideas, and she's going to talk to us about how we can make thought leadership cool again. So take it away, Lee.
Hi, Dennis. Thank you so much for having me. I was just, when we were chatting before, I was telling Dennis that I live in Georgia, so I would not probably have been at many Bay Area meetups, but I'm excited that I can join you now virtually, and I've had fun popping into some of the meetups over the past couple months. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Choose from one of the way too many windows that I have open right now. Okay, so our topic today is about making thought leadership cool again. So first I wanted to tell you how I got involved with thought leadership. So I studied English in college. I wanted to be a writer. And then I graduated during the recession and I accidentally became a marketer. And I had a bunch of different marketing jobs, but then I landed at a marketing agency, a content marketing agency, where I started spending more and more of my time ghostwriting for thought leaders. And so I realized that that was kind of a sweet spot for me because I got to work with really smart, generous people and to help them figure out what their best ideas were and get them out into the world. And I especially like working with people who are kind of hidden thought leaders who have great ideas, but maybe aren't great at communicating them or just need help figuring out how to market themselves and their ideas. And so I figured out that I like doing that so much that I left the agency last year and started just doing thought leadership strategy on my own. I started my own company in the fall. And so here we are today thinking about thought leadership. So I wanted today we're going to talk about what thought leadership is, because there are kind of some dueling definitions out there right now. I want to think about how it's evolving during the pandemic, because these are not normal times. And I've been watching kind of what I think is going to change about thought leadership long term. Some examples of thought leaders I've been watching that have been inspiring and helpful to me. And then a quick exercise to help everyone on this call define your thought leadership strategy, whether you're watching because you want to define yourself as a thought leader or because you're working with a client or someone at your organization who needs help clarifying their ideas. So first, I want to do kind of a quick word association game. So when I say thought leader, what do you think? Type it into the chat. What's the first word that comes to mind for you? And Dennis, you might have to help me see the chat here. Okay, so when I say thought leader,
you want me to start reading out?
Yeah, I can't, for some reason I can't see them. Yeah.
Oh, okay. YouTuber, influencer, idea person, another influencer, big thinker, forward thinking, expert, authority, knowledgeable.
Okay, so we've got a wide range. Some of those are really positive attributes. Expert, someone that's knowledgeable that you want to follow. But then a lot of times lately I've been hearing a lot of people say, isn't that just an influencer, right? And we kind of like to make fun of influencers. It's kind of a dirty word now. It's easy to make fun of people who are sharing their ideas online. So I titled this, Let's Make Thought Leadership Cool Again, because I really want to think about thought leadership as something that you are aspiring to, something that's just an all-out good thing, people who are putting out new, generous, visionary ideas into the market. So I define thought leadership as thinking in public. So sharing your thought process openly, not making decisions and kind of hiding them for a long time and then talking about them 20 years later, but showing your thoughts, showing your work publicly, which is kind of a scary, bold thing to do. And it's sharing your expertise, which is what you know, but sharing what you know and expertise on its own can feel a little boring and not that inspiring. So I think it's important to also share your perspective, which is how you know it, how you learned those lessons. So you might know a lot about building a business, but you probably learned it because you made a lot of mistakes and had a lot of tough times along the way. And people really want to hear about kind of that road that you took, the perspective that you gained on your way to that expertise. And it's also sharing a vision for the future. It's thinking forward, just like some of you said in the chat. So it's giving people a new way to think that can carry you into the future. And so that's why I think of thought leaders really as visionaries. That's another word that I use. So what does it mean to be a thought leader during a pandemic? These are not normal times. I know that for a lot of people, it's hard to find your voice right now. It's hard to know what to say. A lot of us have just been a little quiet online, especially because everybody's struggling. Everyone's trying to figure this all out. And it's kind of a scary time to be in business. We don't really know what's coming around the corner. There's tough news to process every day. So that is changing thought leadership. And that's changing the way that I'm advising people to put together their thought leadership. So I've seen a few trends. So thought leadership has always been about thinking in public, but now it's even more important to really show your thought process because everyone is making decisions in real time. A lot of us are making decisions with very little information to go on. That's what was so hard, especially at the very beginning about this. And so what's inspiring and helpful to other people, the way that you can really be a visionary is showing your thought process, right? So it's not just about the decisions you're making, it's how you're thinking about it. It's what questions you're asking, what information you're trying to gather. And just that process in itself is thought leadership right now. It also means that we all have to be more comfortable, if we want to be thought leaders, sharing more iterative ideas. So as things are changing quickly, we have to be comfortable with knowing that what you share today might not be true or relevant or a good decision in 3 weeks. So this means that we're seeing a lot more of people sharing quick thoughts and ideas on social media in a Twitter thread or a LinkedIn post maybe, instead of taking 3 months and a 20-person team to craft the perfect research report or article. You might be doing that too in the background, but it means being comfortable just working a lot faster and sharing quicker ideas. I think a lot about people I've worked with in the past who would take a couple years to develop a book proposal. We don't really have that luxury of time right now. Things are changing quickly, and what's most valuable to people is what you're figuring out and what's happening in your business right now. It also means being really open and transparent, and that marketing word that we all use, authentic, about what's going on. And I think authenticity has gotten more important right now. So thought leadership rings really hollow if it doesn't acknowledge the confusion and the change and the ambiguity that we're all working in right now. So it means that we all have to get a little bit more open and transparent about what's going on, how we're struggling, and how we're making decisions. So I'd love if you have any thought leaders that you really admire that are inspiring you right now, if you could leave them in the chat for all of us to see and to flag for later, and maybe at the end we can come back and share some of those. But I'm gonna go first. So I wanna share 3 thought leaders and really 3 types of thought leaders that I'm watching and that are inspiring me right now, and that I think could serve as an example for others who aren't sure what kind of message to put out right now. So the first is what I call the beacon. This is someone who, like I said, works in public, thinks in public, and really lays out what they're doing as an example to others. So one really good example of a beacon is Jason Fried. If you're not familiar with him, he is a co-founder of Basecamp, which is a project management tool that I've used for a long time. He has been a beacon as a thought leader for a long time. He wrote a book years ago called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. He has been thinking in public for a long time about how to make work better, more sane, how to use tools to make working remotely better. Somebody's not on mute that I can hear. So Jason is a beacon. He has been really open about how the business decisions he's making to build the company, and he has continued to be a beacon during the pandemic. So he is sharing his leadership decisions really openly in real time. This is a tweet from March 12th. I know no one knows what month or year or day it is anymore, but if you think back to March 12th, that was really the first week and weekend that this got real for a lot of people in the US, at least. It's when we got a lot of announcements that school was going to be closed. I think this was the day that I found out my kids' schools were closed. It was a really scary time. We didn't know what was coming next. We didn't know how to react. So on that day, Jason shared that they were giving Basecamp employees a 4-day weekend to figure out their next steps, how they were going to handle childcare and how they were going to get supplies for themselves and how they were going to take care of their families. So he made a really bold, human-focused leadership decision, and he shared it. He shared the entire text of his message to Basecamp employees in real time. And he's always really shared a look into his process of how he makes decisions and how he runs the business. So this is from Basecamp's podcast called Rework. And if you've never listened to it, it's a really good example of how a branded B2B podcast can actually be really good and interesting. It's a great listen, even if you don't care about Basecamp or you're not a user. So this is an example of when Jason came on the podcast to talk about how they build their product, how they manage their teams, and just what work looks like for them in a really transparent way. So that's an example of a beacon. Number 2, and this is a really approachable, good kind of entry point way to think about thought leadership, is being a curator, a connector, someone who's bringing information together, who's bringing people together, and bringing ideas together. So the example that I'm going to share of a really good curator and connector is Brendan Schrader, who I've worked with for a long time. And Brendan runs a company in the Twin Cities called Antenna. And Antenna is a marketing consulting firm that basically connects free agent marketers, independent workers, with big companies who need marketing help. So he connects marketing leaders with free agent marketers. He's already a connector. That's his business brand. And that's how he's come out as a thought leader right now too. So he has curated resources for those two groups of people who are looking to him, both the marketing independents and the marketing leaders at companies. So he's pulled together information on his website really quickly about how to make a marketing strategic plan during a standstill. That's a new thing we're all trying to figure out. He's talking to independent workers about the resources that are available to them, how to get help, how to think about running a small business right now. And he's giving new advice to people about how to engage your team remotely in a market that wasn't really doing a lot of remote work. And he pulled all this together really quickly because he knew that his role right now is to bring people and ideas together. And I was really struck with how he brought a human element into this content too. So he has Q&As and interviews with both of those kinds of marketers, independent marketers and marketing leaders at companies. With a look at how they're thinking about their decisions right now. He really put a bunch of people forward as thought leaders on his website. And I thought that was really helpful. And then another part of him being a curator and a connector is that he is gathering community and activating community toward a shared visionary goal. So his company has supported the local food bank in Minneapolis for a long time, Second Harvest. And Brendan is someone who people always want to take to coffee. They always want to take him to coffee and pick his brain or, think about who they could connect with through Brendan. And so he started a campaign called Coffee Up, where you think about the colleague or the friend that you wish you could take out to coffee right now. I know we all have a long list. And you donate what you would have spent on 2 coffees to Second Harvest Food Bank in his area. And so he's calling it Coffee Up. I didn't check before this, but they've already raised thousands of dollars just in the past week or so for this campaign. So he's really figuring out how to bring his community together in a way that can help other people around them. So the third type is the challenger. This is very different than the curator. So there are all different kinds of thought leaders in the world. The challenger is really offering a new viewpoint, a new perspective, and they're starting sometimes controversial conversations online. And a great example of a challenger is my friend Katie Martell. She calls herself an unapologetic marketing truth teller. And that has been true for a long time and continues to be true during the pandemic. So Katie has been a marketer for a long time, and her focus, her interest area is thinking about how brands can engage in social issues without pandering to their audience. And that's certainly relevant right now as we see all the commercials of brands that are here for us right now. And we all get a million emails with that kind of subject line. So she's been thinking about things like Earth Day and Pride and how they can fit into a marketing message. And now she's thinking about what that looks like during the pandemic. So Katie is great at starting conversations. This screenshot is an example of a new Mattel playset that she posted on her LinkedIn. And she wanted to know, is this pandering? It's a playset that's thanking the helpers during the coronavirus. So is this pandering, or is this somehow helpful? And people had all different takes. She kind of offered a couple different options for, the ways she could see this playing out, and people had all different kinds of perspectives to add. But as a challenger, she's starting conversations. And in all of these examples, and all three of these types of thought leaders, you can see that it's not always about showing up with the most expertise or having the clearest ideas laid out that everyone's going to follow. Sometimes it's just about finding the information that your audience needs. And that can look really different depending on who you are and what you have to offer. So I feel like I'm talking so quickly, but I'm trying to fit this all into our 30-minute block. I want to take a second to think about how you can find your voice. So think about the thought leader in your world that you're focused on right now. Maybe that's you, your personal brand, especially if you're job searching right now, which I know a lot of people are. Or maybe it's the CEO of your company who you want to develop as a thought leader in your industry. Let's think about how you can really hone in and find that voice. So I always return to a really simple framework here, which is find the overlap. The overlap you're looking for is what your audience needs from the world and what you specifically can provide. And that overlap is really where the best thought leadership happens. And if you're producing content that only fits on one side of this Venn diagram, it might sound a little hollow, or it might not help you find the success you're looking for. And it's because it's not in that overlap. So like most marketing frameworks, this is pretty simple, but this has been really helpful for me, especially during the pandemic, is to really start asking questions about both sides of this Venn diagram and think about what the overlap could be. So it's important that you start with that audience side. I always think about the audience first before I think about the thought leader. So ask yourself, what is your audience stressed out about? The answer is probably a lot different than it was in January. What do they need? Not from you, but what do they need from the world to do their job better, if you're talking about B2B? And what are they looking for that isn't already available everywhere, right? So everyone has so much information coming to them right now. I feel like I have a headache every night just from trying to process so much information. So they probably have a lot of answers coming to them. The question is, what are they looking for that they don't already have? And then you can think about how you would fit into that overlap, what you can contribute. So we talked about how we often think about thought leaders as experts. So maybe you do have really helpful expertise that fits into what your audience needs right now. And if so, that's great. But there are a lot of other forms that thought leadership can take. So maybe you need to give some guidance, some mentorship, if that's something that you're good at. Maybe you could provide some advice based on your own perspective, again, how you've learned the lessons that you've learned. Maybe you could be a curator where if there's too much information about, let's say government support to independent workers right now, you could curate that information and help people find just the most important things they need or the newest things, or you could clarify things that are confusing with all that cloud of information. You could also provide connections. This is a really important part of being a leader, is helping people connect to the people and the ideas that they need. You could give them a new viewpoint, an alternate view they hadn't considered yet that's not already available out there. Or I included one more example, is just to to give an ear. A lot of people just need someone to listen right now. And I've seen a lot of leaders who I really respect opening their calendars one day a week and saying, if you need to talk, if you're not sure what to do next, if you've lost your job, if you need some guidance, let's talk. And that's one of the most generous forms of thought leadership I think you could provide. So, Dennis, I'm going to take a deep breath. So kind of recapping what we've talked about, how I think about thought leadership, and my kind of call to action for you is to think in public, be bold, don't be afraid to share your thought process and how you're thinking about business. Find the overlap between what your audience needs and what you uniquely can provide for them. And really look forward, stake out a vision for the future. This is more important than ever. If you don't feel like the conversation in your industry is very generous or people-focused or productive, you could provide an alternate vision for the future. That's what thought leadership is all about. And that's why I think working in thought leadership as a marketer is really interesting. And it's really a place where you have a lot of power to drive important conversations. That's how I think about my work every day, is that I have the power today to push people towards more generous, strong, interesting ideas that will help more people. So that might be kind of cheesy, but that's how I think about thought leadership. And that's why I think it's cool. And that's why I want to make it cool again. So that's my charge to you. And now I was hoping that we could look through kind of any questions or ideas that people have left in the chat and just all talk together, because I know there are some good conversations and some really smart people that come to this meetup every week.
Sure thing. Thanks, Lee. So yeah, feel free to start using the chat for some questions. Are you able to see the chat, Lee?
I'm coming back
if you like mouse over the lower part of Zoom, you should see some controls.
Gotcha. Okay. Yes. So for some reason, when I was sharing my slides, it just blocked it.
Oh, yeah. Maybe you couldn't when you're sharing. Okay.
So I'm just looking through quickly.
I had a thought. I noticed on your second to last slide that I love the concept of listening, but it makes me wonder, because I almost think of it as the inverse of thought leadership, in that a lot of times with thought leadership, I think of people observing what you're writing or saying, whereas listening, I don't think of as like others being able to notice except those that are being listened to. So how do you think about the listening angle in regard to the thought leadership?
Well, I mean, I think that leaders are always listening, right? They say that leaders are learners. So I think that there are different formats that thought leadership could take, right? So we're talking about potentially even a one-on-one thought leadership session where you are listening to someone's challenges and sharing your ideas. That could really be fuel for your future and more public thought leadership. I think a lot about this kind of virtuous cycle with content marketing and with thought leadership, where when you force yourself to make time to write or to make a video, or for me to make this presentation, or to have a one-on-one conversation with someone in your audience, you come up with new ideas and you crystallize their ideas in a way that can really inform your future thought leadership and your future work. So I'm always reminded that every time you can kind of make yourself come up with some ideas and come up with some thought leadership, it can really inform your day-to-day work in a way that's really interesting. It's a cycle. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm seeing some questions now from Leah. Hi. How would you advise potential thought leaders in organizations where they may be getting PR or legal advice that thinking in public right now is risky? That's a great question. And that's why I think a lot of people are quiet right now. So I think that this is a great time to make, or a time when I think a lot of people will make bad decisions. And so if you feel like for your brand, your corporate brand, being quiet is the way to go, right? Like if you feel like it's a minefield and you feel like it's pretty likely that you could say the wrong thing, I think one path right now could be staying quiet. I wouldn't push anyone to say anything that they don't want to say publicly. But I do think about thought leaders as people, not as brands. So, you might have a person in your organization who is willing to be a little more open and to say things publicly. So while we represent our companies and our employers, I think we all need to think about our personal brands and our personal thought leadership as being a little separate from our companies. And we all know what we want to stand for and what we want to represent. And right now, I would say as long as you're human focused and generous, if you can kind of check your ideas and your statements against those criteria, I would say you should be safe. I don't know. Does anyone else have any experience working for kind of a conservative brand that's nervous right now?
Yeah, but probably in the same boat.
Where you just feel like you need to be quiet?
Well, yeah, no, I'm taking more of the curator approach personally, and a little bit of thought leadership. But I think just generally, I understand where she's coming from with the question.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And not everyone has to be a beacon or a challenger, because those inherently come with more risk. Maybe you could be a curator and a connector. And again, maybe you don't even have to be sharing your own ideas. That's an important thing too. You can just gather what other people are saying. And that's a lot safer. Maybe lower reward, but lower risk too. I saw another question that I'm looking back for.
I have a related question, Lee. So I have a friend in a company that this is not directly associated with the pandemic, but I have a friend at a stealth mode startup. It's a very high-tech field, and a couple of other competitors, and their executives are struggling, or not struggling. They're wondering about the thought leadership strategy because they're fearful that if they say some things now that it could be signals to the competition, because a lot of companies are pre-launch right now. So how would you recommend they think about thought leadership as far as like in a timing sense?
Yeah. And I think that might kind of connect with another question we have in the chat, which is how would you balance thought leadership with people on your team who want to focus a lot on your product and on kind of the sales angle?
Right.
So I think for the people you're talking about, let's say that they're launching a product in HR tech, they're focused on employee engagement. I'm just making up an example. I think it's completely safe to start developing yourself as a thought leader about employee engagement. There's tons you could talk about without tipping your hand as to the specific proprietary technology that you're developing. I would start to talk about the problems in the market that you're potentially going to solve, and to start kind of building some awareness around those problems, especially if it's a new kind of solution that isn't on the market yet. That's a big part of thought leadership usually, is kind of establishing the fact that there's a problem that technology would need to solve. So I don't think you can start too early establishing yourself as a thought leader and practicing being a thought leader online about your big general topic area without zooming in too close if they feel like that would be too specific now.
Gotcha.
And I wanted to say too, I just thought about this, talking about people in conservative industries or conservative brands who are worried about speaking out right now. Thinking about that curator and connector role, this is a great time to bring together voices in your industry. So again, if you don't want to share your ideas because you're worried about them being too risky, you could interview other people. This is what a lot of people do as their thought leadership, is they just interview interesting people, other leaders in their space. I think it's more interesting if you kind of have a perspective that you use to ask the questions, but you can play it really safe by just bringing together interesting ideas and not putting your own name on them.
We have a comment from Michelle. Thought Leadership Roundup puts through really well. And hello, Michelle.
Yes.
Who else has questions? Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to speak your question. We can go on for a few more minutes as long as we have something to talk about.
Y'all left a bunch of good examples of thought leaders specifically, it looks like in marketing right now, in the comments, that people are looking for new ideas and new people to follow.
So I'll start with a question, Lee. You had just mentioned thinking about doing interviews. If someone's listening today and like wants to get started, is there some places you would go? Like, is it being more active on Twitter, LinkedIn, or launching a newsletter, or like where would you suggest they go to get started?
I would suggest finding that overlap. So that's how I answer pretty much every question. If you kind of have the world as your oyster and you don't know where to start, think about your audience. Where are they? And think about where you would be comfortable communicating. So an email is a way to communicate that is that's a little safer. It's not as iterative, right? So I publish an email every other Friday that gives me 2 weeks to come up with what I want to talk about. I can edit myself. I can write it 2 weeks in advance, right? It doesn't have to be quick hitting. Other people love posting on Twitter and they find a lot of engagement with their audience there, and they're comfortable with those quick hit iterative ideas, what they've thought of that day. In other industries, LinkedIn is huge still. So I think it depends really on that overlap. Not just where your audience is, but where you're going to be comfortable engaging. Because I've worked with a lot of leaders who just don't want to be on social media. That's not your space. So that's not their space. So they've just had to come up with other ways to reach that audience.
Excellent. Good advice. All right. Giving folks 10 seconds, excuse me, to see if you have any questions. Oh, Lee. So Lee, we had one question about where people can find you on Twitter. So I shared your Twitter handle. Where can people go if they want to connect with you or find out more about your work?
Yeah, so like I said, I send an email every other Friday about the future of thought leadership. So you can sign up at leepriceideas.com, and I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at leeprice. And thank you for having me. It was fun to connect
Thanks
with some
for
West
joining us,
Coasters
Lee.
today. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. We're getting a lot of, or you're getting a lot of compliments in the chat about your talk. And I am recording this, so I'll have the recording out to everybody later today.
Okay, thanks so much. And feel
All
free
right,
to
thanks,
connect with
everyone.
me by email if you want to
Very
talk.
helpful. Thank you.
All right, thanks
Stay
everybody.
safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Lee.